Ms. Wynn, you were involved in the fight for education during the 60s and the civil rights struggle. Talk about that for me, please.
Well, I arrived here when things had really commenced as far as Attorney Lloyd Barbee was concerned. And I arrived here the end of August, the first day of school, 1965, and there was a school boycott, which no one had told me because I was absolutely new to Milwaukee, having gotten off the bus the night before. And I was assigned to 20th Street School, which has now been called somebody else. Everything's changed. And after I was getting off from school, I heard that all of the schools that wanted to had their children had gone to St. Mark's Church, and that there was a freedom school being held. My husband had taken the children to school because I had to go to work in the opposite direction. And so when he got to Hopkins Street School, there was a group out there that said, there is no school here for us. Our children are going to St. Mark's. So he took my children there. So when I got off work, I didn't know where they were. And so I went where they told me they were. And I met Reverend Gregg, who was really a significant leader at the time, and brought them home. And, but I did meet Attorney Lloyd Barbee. And he explained very thoroughly what the situation was, that the system itself was segregated, and that it was not going to get any better unless there was some sort of direct action, and that there was a suit that was that had begun, and he was eager to gather people to help raise money for music, which was the group that was the fundraiser at the time. And so he invited me to come to his office and help collect evidence. Well, this was very exciting to me. I came from Chicago, had taught school on the west side of town, which was absolutely the worst part of town. The streets all began with K's, and it was really called Kill Town. I taught school there, and it was rough, but the kids, we got along. We passed the test we were supposed to pass. I was able to walk back and forth to school, and as I did here. And so I understood what total segregation could do. Now, I was from New York. I had not had that, so it was new. In meeting with him on Sundays, where I took my children, and they would sit on the hall marble floor down on Water and Wisconsin, and go through yearbooks and see if there were any blacks. Well, there were very, very few blacks. And if they found one, they would all shout in the hall. So the schools, it was the high schools we were concentrating upon. So that was the beginning. Then the next effort, of course, as I mentioned, was for money. There was the money that he would needed was not all in place. And so it was a constant, continual, creative massacre of trying to find money. The NAACP at the time had agreed to be supportive. At the same time, almost simultaneously, the commando group, which was the NAACP Youth Council, which at that time was beginning to be led by Father Grappi, had also solicited support from the NAACP. That is the national. The local wanted them to do whatever they would do. They wished they would do both, but they didn't know. The NAACP eventually took the position very near the critical time of not supporting the desegregation, which was really called, Lloyd Barbee was interested in desegregating the schools, and Father Grappi was interested in open housing. Mr. Barbee felt that by the time you got to open housing, everyone would be very old who needed something right then. And so the NAACP, I guess, after they saw the white priest followed by this stream of young blacks across the bridge, in our opinion, decided that that was better PR than this school desegregation, which was elsewhere, but was very unusual when you thought of Milwaukee being the city that had this serious school segregation problem. Well, we know now that it is called the number one school of segregation. So Lloyd Barbee was really a visionary. However, money was very difficult. Other people collected, worked to help collect the evidence. People at UWM were most helpful. And they had agreed that they would computerize the information for a fee, which was much less than we would have gotten in another sector. When we looked around town, we couldn't find any money. All the nice people who wanted to give money had just about given it and were now looking to us for something much more creative. I, as a new school member, teacher here, was solicited by the union, which was the National Education Association. There was a representative election between the National Education Association and the AFT, the American Federation of Teachers. The black teachers who had come from the South almost knocked you over telling you to join the NEA, the National Education Association, because they had been most supportive, both economically and just generally, as the desegregation situations took place in the South. And so I didn't know anything. The AFT had been active in Chicago, and I knew them, and so I preferred to go with the NEA. In doing that, I became active in the local itself, which was involved in all sorts of little things that would make a new person to town be interested. Like I didn't know where places were, and I found where places were by going to meetings. However, I learned that the NEA had a fund called the Duchesne Fund, which was a fund that was used by NEA to offer money to black teachers in the South whose children were in college and they were released because of the segregation rules, where schools and whole districts were closed. And they supported these teachers, which was really what the teachers from the South were telling me, but I didn't understand. It was through the Duchesne Fund, after I went to a convention and found out what was going on, because I had no idea, that the Duchesne Fund offered these services to teachers who were in segregated situations. But they had never been solicited by a northern teacher claiming that there was de jure segregation in a large northern city. There were certain rules of that which I had to find, and I found that by reading the rules, because I really knew absolutely nothing, that if they did not respond to you, that is the Duchesne Fund of the NEA, did not respond to you within 30 days, you were entitled to a executive committee hearing to present your case. I waited 60 days, probably because I had to wait to get enough money, because I had to use my own salary to get there. And so I took that 2-week salary, got me a room in Washington, D.C., and a round-trip ticket. I solicited both the local association here, the Milwaukee Teachers Association, and the Wisconsin Education Association. And they kind of looked at me like I was crazy. But Lloyd Barbee and other workers had accumulated 36 poster boards of information where they listed the schools, where they showed the playgrounds where the children were being segregated, where they explained the short number of black teachers and where they were placed when they came. And so it was a pattern of desegregation, politely done, but obviously done. So when I arrived there, I went to the executive committee and I presented these 36 poster boards with a pointer, going specifically down each of them, showing them the diagrams, taking their questions. It was about an hour and a half presentation. They dismissed me and told me they would let me know the next morning. So I went back to my hotel hoping they would tell me before 11 because I had to check out and I really didn't have any more money. The president of the Wisconsin Education Association was present, as was the executive director of the MTA, Mr. Coulter and Mr. Gutenberg, respectively. they were just amazed that I had come. And I didn't, my family was from Washington, but I didn't know anything but the cab. And so just at checkout time, when I was checking out, I was told that they wanted me to come back to the building. And I did, and they said that they would send me in writing what they were going to do. They agreed that they would look into it. They said that I would have to hold a hearing in Milwaukee of people who agreed so they could get a picture of the city. I did. I held it at the Ramada Inn down here on 6th Street at the time. And I had about 50-some people who came. It was held within that month, really near the end of the month. And they, after hearing it, taking questions from the people and asking them, they sent in a team of about 5. They were very thorough. And they announced to me within 10 days that they would grant $10,000 so that the computerization could begin by Mr. Barbee, and that they would make available a cadre of civil rights attorneys in the region to be available to him as he chose to use them for research and for other things. Well, we won. And the group, I think it was Dr. Stoddard, who was at UWM, began the computerization of the information. I went on and continued to be active in the union. I was elected a 3rd vice president and then a 1st vice president, and then I decided I'd run for president. And I ran for president and I won. And then then that was the time when they had the Hortonville strikes. Then I ran again and I won. So I had 2 terms as president. I also became very involved in the NEA by going to the conventions. And so I ran for executive committee of the NEA, and I ran, which in my mind put me in line to kind of shepherd through those needs that a segregated school district should have. After my last term, which I think was in '76, it did come to trial. I was an expert witness, and it was determined by Judge Reynolds that there was segregation in the city. A Grand Master was appointed, and everything commenced. Now, I should say that those people who knew of segregation from afar, because many people here who were black didn't know they were segregated. It was so different in many instances than where they'd come from that this was like dying and going to heaven, until some educated, determined man said to them, "You are being educated in a segregated school system." Well, that kind of caused a great deal of a quake about town. But the case was moving on. There were people that said, "We've educated our children in the South without desegregation." It was all sorts of things. No one was willing really to compare what could be versus what was. Now, I taught in the schools. I really thought I had arrived in heaven when I got here compared to the Chicago schools. I, at one time, was teaching double shifts. I once had 50 children in the class. There weren't enough seats, so they would move. Every day it was your turn to take the seat by the window on the floor. So I had been in some situations that were difficult. But I think that what I found here was everything was available. You could see up your dress. The floors were so glossy. They were like a mirror. And though everything was just, spectacularly clean and orderly. When I opened the doors to the books, had every book I wanted. There was all sorts of supplies. So it was a different world. And it appeared to me that though I was in a school at that time when I arrived, was 50% black and white. And youngsters were there, parents were interested. I walked to school from my house at 17th and Locust to 20th and Meineke. And by the time I got there, it was like Pied Piper. The kids would see you coming and they would walk after you. So I enjoyed it. But I had to agree that the overall picture of what our children were getting was not a global picture, but it was very, very difficult to tell a community that was so parochial and so structured that a change would make things better. Now, I should say that the special master's ruling was not accepted very well, because what it meant, it could have meant, I should say, it threateningly could have implied was that you would have to integrate North Side children with South Side children, and by God, that would cause a riot. And so since we'd had this riot where one person had lost their lives, the view, I'm sure, of doing that really meant a mammoth onslaught. And so the master the special master, Gradowski was, I think, his name, was a man who understood better than this fool from Chicago that this was impossible. Lloyd Barbee believed that it should be an effort which was extended. And of course, they thought he was a total radical. But in the end, it was necessary, though, through many things were discussed, a circle affair, some children, not all, special children, not regular children, all sorts of dumb, racist, ignorant things. But in the end, it was decided that we should sit down and study it more. And the program that came up really was the Chapter 220 program, which allowed parents to select schools from the 26 or 28 school districts that were available, the suburban school districts surrounding Milwaukee, to apply. And there were certain dates that were set, and they had certain things that they needed. Now, we should be honest. This was about money, because the white kids were not filling all the empty seats in these suburban school districts. And it was also like you could get a certain amount of money if your school district accepted a black kid. I think it was $5,000. It's since varied since then. And this helped many school districts maintain their schools, keep their teachers. So you have to remember that, because everybody in the 70s, the late 70s, was dealing with money and pretending it wasn't a problem. And so they began to receive the children. The program was publicized and explained. The opportunity for particularly many middle-class parents, this was an opportunity to engage in exploration, in history-making things, in the possibility that this could be corrected. And so many people did involve themselves. There was a structure that was set up based upon the negotiations which were done by the NAACP local chapter and the 20-some school districts. The president of the NAACP at the time was Mr. Felmus Chaney, and he selected a team of negotiators. I was head of the negotiating team. There was also a whole operation that was set up, the operating committee, where members of these school districts and the NAACP had representatives. And those representatives would deal with those problems as they occurred and would establish things that needed to be done. For instance, that there would be buses, late buses to bring black children in from the suburban district if they were in basketball or anything, or that they could attend summer school and what that meant, and at the times they needed to arrive, but which really got to be quite a thing. I was chairman of that committee too. My God, as I talk about it. But anyway, we, through a period of time, an executive director was appointed. There were people selected, an ombudsman to deal with anticipated problems, and people who were working in certain districts. So it was monitored and pretty well run, because we really had to make sure that we were meeting the problems before they became huge. And it also had to indicate, as we were sincerely doing, an effort to make sure that the children were adequately cared for, that their needs were met. And there were parent groups set up, and there were buses that would go to school districts, high schools, and pick parents up if they wanted to come to the meetings in the suburban district. So it worked. It's still going on. I sent 2 of my grandchildren there, and 3 of them are still in the 220 program. I considered academically their education superior. People would say, well, why you send them to a white school? They'll come back white. I said, no, they will go to the white school, and I will continue to blackanize them when they come home. And so the main thing was that you had to get the basic educational secure ingredients the pillars in place, because we do live in a white community, and it is a global society. There is no way to evade different races. You function better if you understand as many of them as you can. And if you are always will remember that you are as competent, as capable, as human, as visionary as they are. Now, if you don't understand that, anywhere you go to school, you will never be successful. So I believe that Lloyd Barbee's effort was heroic. His outcome, the intention, was critical. And the fact that we are where we are now proves that he was a prophet. And so I'm very glad that I worked with him, that my children were on the floors, the marble floors in the buildings, that other people's children were, Marshall Coggs and whatnot, that people who were interested did things. But it was an overwhelming task. It was like it was hard to explain, but people were interested. So that's kind of now how we got where we are now, is because people have lied to themselves. They believe that choice schools can correct it. No, choice schools, block by block, stone by stone, have taken it apart. Now we add to that the economic situation that we're in. And who can say that that did not have a great deal to do with it? Because if a father cannot feed his family, he almost is not sure where they're going to school. And if a mother is not sure that her children are safe when they go to the neighborhood schools, because the neighborhood schools are not safe, that's why people didn't go there. That's why they're going to choice schools, because they think they're safer. So we have an explosion. We have an earthquake of things that we need to do in order to prepare ourselves for the future. But I'm glad I was part of the past.
Well, and part of what's going on today. I do want to go back and ask you about a couple of things. Tell me about music. What did the group do?
Well, music was a group of, it was Milwaukee United for Integration, something with money. And they were citizens in the community that had organized around Mr. Barbee. And their sole purpose was to do money, to do fundraisers, to try to get the money that was necessary. But the group was a small group, because many people didn't know what you were talking about, what money, what evidence. And so it was a whole question of educating the community and the concerned part of the community. And that was not large. It was a group of people that were interested, but not a group of people who had the necessary money to come up with it, and particularly come up with it at the time you needed it, real fast, a certain amount. But they continued to do that, to collect money. But the money that we eventually got from the NEA, the National Education Association, was really the money that did the computerization program. And Mr. Barbee took no money. And so it was in the end when an amount of money, which I don't remember, was given, that was taken care of. So it was really an emotion of love and war and determination to make a difference.
What kind of people were in music? What was the racial group?
Well, frankly, most of the music was mainly white. There were blacks in it. The plaintiffs and people involved in the suit, they were black, and there were some whites. But I think the thing that people really were concerned about was that the community not come off as a racist community. And so they were anxious to be involved. They wanted to know what was going on and how they could help. And they were most helpful to Mr. Barbee, just that the situation was very, very large. And there were counters. We should remember now, everyone wasn't happy about this. And so there were counters out there. And the board, the school board itself, initially just felt this was absolutely terrible. You were disturbing their school. And so I would say that the liberal whites were very supportive. The moderate whites wanted it to be resolved. And the other whites had their own group that they spoke with.
And did music do any protesting as well?
Well, the freedom schools were protest schools. And school board meetings would be picketed. particularly strong turnout at school board meetings. People spoke there. It wasn't quiet as it is now. It was very volatile. I remember one time Lloyd Barbee was asked to come to a meeting, and this is before the Freedom Fund schools, and he did not want to appear before them. So there was draped an empty chair, and that was supposed to be Mr. Barbee, who of course didn't care. And so there were all sorts of protests going on. And then teachers were kind of frightened because there were very few black teachers, and so they did not want their heads stuck out. I was a fool. I got here and didn't know I could have gotten. I didn't even have tenure. I didn't even know I could have been gone. But I think that the churches, I mentioned St. Mark's and St. Matthew's. St. Matthew's is where the Freedom Fund schools were held. St. Boniface, which is where Father Grappi was. They, of course, housed and responded to the needs of the commandos. But there were also people in there who were interested. So it was a church thing, a large church project.
As I look over the old film footage from the newsreel clips, one of the things that strikes me is there's a protest against busing because of the segregation in the 60s, that apparently they bused black kids into white schools and then segregated them within the schools.
Yes, they did.
Can you talk about that?
Well, I have a son who, Sherman Park School, they drew a diagonal line from the steam pipe to the school. And the kids would come from Hopkins in the morning. They'd be at Hopkins. And then a bus would take them from Hopkins to Sherman. Then they might come back. I think they did come back to school to eat. Then they took the bus back, and then they played on their right side at Sherman Park. Now, the view on busing, because most people who were from the South, if they did any sort of desegregation, they were bused. And if they lived in a rural area, they were bused. And in rural areas, there were black buses and white buses. That's true. But the question became, how are you going to do this? In other words, if your children were being prepared to go to work on some sort of transportation, I said, I don't care if you fly them there. Just get them there. And then they can determine, as they grow, what's what. But if you leave kids in one thing, that's all they know. That is their world. You are limiting them. So the busing issue was always a problem, and frankly still is. I remember somebody said they didn't want to see little black babies stand on the corner. They maybe hope they stand on the corner so they can stand on the corner and get a job. Because if they can't work the computer, have some knowledge of writing sentences, letters, reading well, they will not even be able to have the 2-something for bus fare. That's where we are now. So I think there are some things that obviously need to be resolved. There's some real concern about the emotional impact of all of this. But the bottom line comes down, can you put a check in the teller's window? Can you do that? Can you keep your children out of St. Charles School for Boys? Can you guarantee that your girls will understand that pregnancy is not the first option for a new apartment? If you cannot do those things, then you need to fly them by a jet wherever they need to go to get a better picture of what life can be.
What was life like in the communities while all these struggles were going on?
Well, you had a breakdown of those that thought it was important and those that thought it wasn't. And so, as usual, people who are dealing with just surviving, just making sure they get their things together so they can move before the 2 months or 1 month at a time runs out. It's critical. And at that time, welfare was, let me call it a stabilizer. Regretfully, I call it that. Because it did mean that people were going to get money on a regular basis to do whatever it was they had to do, however they did it. And that was a stabilizer. And so the need for schooling, parents understood. Mothers particularly understood because many fathers were not there. But they really didn't know what impact they could have on this school that was nice, clean, on time. Kids had books, things that if they'd come from the South, they may not have had. They may not have had books from the white people. They may have had any books. They may have had to walk the rural road. So it was a whole different world. And so I would say, I don't know how you can really equate it as I wish we could, but it was clear that things were not good. And so the measurement of good, better, and best was difficult to arrive at.
What do you remember most about that struggle?
Well, I remember that the neighborhoods were so nice. They were nice and quiet. I took the bus because I didn't drive until I learned how to come here. I'm originally from New York City, and nobody drove in New York when I was coming up. So I learned the bus system. I didn't think things were pronounced like they said Teutonia instead of Titonia. They said strange things that I didn't understand. But I enjoyed teaching. I've always loved teaching. I could walk to work, rain, snow, or whatever, and I didn't have a negative on it. But I think that it also allowed me to do something I had not been able to do. That was to be involved in a civil rights movement. That when I lived in Chicago and went through all the things, I never was in it because I had 5 babies. I was home and I taught school and I worked a second job. I could hardly find my door. I was so busy. So I didn't have any involvement in what was going on in Chicago. And only watching it on television was enticing, but it seemed impossible. So coming to Milwaukee, where you were starting with an issue that had wreaked America, which was segregation, and the alteration of the intent of being an American productive citizen, because you weren't working, you were on welfare, and so productivity was askew. It meant you could pay your rent, you could buy your food, but that was it. You had to wait for the next month. And I saw that as eschewing the American dream. And so I came in as a newcomer and kind of watched, went to places, worked, obviously expressed my opinion. Sometimes they didn't want to see me coming to a meeting. But I remember Superintendent Goucher saying, who was the superintendent of schools after I came here for a while, late 60s, early 70s. I wanted to go to a convention for teachers in someplace, I can't remember where it was. And my principal had put in the request and did not agree. And then it came back from Dr. Goucher, who told me at a board meeting publicly that I was the best PR they had and I could go. Well, my principal didn't waste any time in transferring me from the school I liked to the neighboring school. He transferred me from 20th Street School. His name was Richard Stoller. He transferred me from there to 21st Street School to Dr. Bartolezzi, which I stayed and enjoyed until I left to go serve as president of WEAC. So I would say you do things and you get repercussions. But my mother used to always say you get your loving at the house. So you don't always, when you do things, you don't expect people to love you. And frequently they don't understand you. And so I enjoyed the confusion and think that we are now embroiled in so much that it's almost overwhelming. And I don't know what to say. I watch. I don't offer my counsel because my counsel may be too different. But I believe that our children deserve the very best. I think a public education is the best way to get it. And I think that our teachers need to be as educated as possible for as many changes as we would expect. And our parents must grow up and participate, because to this point they haven't. They've left it to someone else. And it really is their responsibility.
Amen to that. Let me ask you one. Change tape? Oh, okay.
In education is now in her mid-30s and doesn't